Hi, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We are delighted to present award-winning celebrated author Phillip B. Williams and his phenomenal new book, Ours. Phillip will be in conversation with tonight with author and Washington University professor Sowande Mustakeem. Some notes before we begin. Today's event is only possible because of your support. When you support LeftBankBooks, your money goes directly into your local economy, so it funds your streets and parks. It also helps us support writers and give them events like this that they deserve. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I also want to extend a welcome to our virtual audience. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, you'll be able to participate in the Q&A at the end. Just leave your question as a comment on YouTube. So thank you for being here. We have a fantastic calendar of events coming up. Of note, on March 9th, we're partnering with St. Louis's Very Aging Foundation for a morning of self-reflection and self-healing featuring Shannon Lee and her new book, Be Water, My Friend. Then on March 11th, U.S. poet laureate Ada Limon will be with us. We'll be on SIU's campus for a evening of poetry and discussion around her work. So please join us for that as well. A full calendar of all of our events is always available on our website. We've got names such as Glenda Laughlin, Sarah McCammon, and Deborah Taffa. All of our events can be found online. Readers of all ages are sure to find something they will enjoy. So for tonight's event, we are so happy to be joined by Phillip B. Williams. Phillip is the author of 2 collections of poetry, Thief in the Interior, which was the winner of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award and the Lambda Literary Award. In addition, Mutiny was the finalist for the Penn Volker Award for Poetry Collection and the winner of the 2022 American Book Award. Phillip is also the recipient of the winning award and fellowships from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University and the National Endowment of the Arts. He currently teaches in the MFA Creative Writing program at New York University. Phillip's new book, Ours, has been chosen as a most anticipated book of 2024 by Oprah's Book Club, Reader's Digest, the Rumpus, Kirkus Review, Millions, Lit Hub, and many more are singing its praises. It is an ingenious and sweeping novel. It introduces us to an enigmatic woman named Saint, a fearsome conjurer who in the 1830s annihilates plantations all over Arkansas to rescue the people that enslaved there. She brings them to a haven of her own creation, a town just north of St. Louis, naturally concealed from outsiders, and it is named Ours. Set over the course of 4 decades and steeped in the rich tradition of American literature, informed by Black surrealism, mythology, and spirituality, Ours is a stunning exploration of the possibilities and limitations of love and freedom by a writer of capacious vision and talent. And again, joining us tonight to discuss this fantastic book, Sowande Mustakeem is an award-winning historian with broad specializations in slavery at sea, medicine, terror, violence, slavery and memory, women in crime, and Black freedom in American history. She is currently an associate professor in the departments of history and African American studies at WashU in St. Louis. She is globally known as the author of her award-winning book, Slavery at Sea, and has an upcoming book on women in crime that is in works. So look forward to that. So please join me in welcoming Phillip and Sowande.
Well, hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello to everybody and welcome. You are in for a treat with the conversation, even more to learn about this dynamic book. Are you ready? Yeah? Okay, look, I know I'm an academic, but I'm not. My goal to keep us awake and to keep us engaged so you can know and go to, whoa, that's in there? So, from author to author, how did it begin? Yes, this came from a short story.
Right.
But what was the spark? What was the crystal maybe? What was it that gave new life to what became this?
My mother.
Ooh.
She told me stories about her father when he lived in Gary, Indiana. He was also a pastor. And he would mix, like, do his Christian thing, but then he would also have voodoo-like practices, like southern thresholds. And when she told me one of these stories, can I tell it now? It's quick. So he lived with his younger sister, and she was out, and there was a woman who wanted to visit her. And so she knocked on the door, my grandmother opened, he said, oh, tea is out, but come on in because it's hot. And she moved, the story that she moved as though she's gonna cross the threshold, and then she pulled back and stopped. And then she said, no, you know what, I'm okay, I'm not gonna actually come in, I'll wait for her outside. It's like 98, 100 degrees outside, he keeps inviting her in, she keeps saying no. And then eventually, after several passes, she turns away and she walks away. What happened was that he had salted his threshold, and so what the salt was supposed to do is to keep out evil spirits, evil people, negative energy. And so the idea was that whoever this woman was, she had ill intent and she couldn't cross that threshold. Now, whether or not that friendship survived after that, I don't know. But that was a big, and I put that story in here, and that was a big inspiration for thinking about what are the different ways that Black folks are navigating through spirituality to protect themselves and the ones that they love.
Well, thank you for your family and your own evolution to be exposed and to remember the story, to want to invoke it. Because within the world of slavery and freedom, there's a fear to engage with the hoodoo, the conjuring, and then to give power to the people and then the community itself. So can you also speak to how you want the future to remember the past by way of conjuring, by way of symbolism? I mean, there's so much power that you have put literally in every detail and sense. So can you speak to that? Because there's so much that you were channeling.
Oh, right. Sometimes it felt as though I was just moving my fingers and the words were just appearing on the screen, and it became that, and that kind of synergy between myself and what in my imagination, the histories, ancestors, whatever you want to call it. But what I think what I'm most interested in is thinking about relationship with the earth. So what is, like all human beings, relationship with the earth, particularly if we were to understand kind of envision this, beginning, what would then be, Black folks' identity to the world around us, what is our relationship to the roots, which is where root word comes from, the roots that we use to heal, sometimes to make sick, but hopefully not. What is our relationship to the moon? What is our relationship to water? How do we measure things that are typically now done with apps or some kind of scientific divination? When really the body would tell us, or, like the moon and the cycles, those are hand in hand for a reason. And there's still other ways that the body and the earth are connected. And so voodoo is a first practice. It's not a practice of evil, or really even like it's not really one that deals with spirits in the way that voodoo does, right? There's still more ancestral knowledge that comes with the voodoo practice, as opposed to thinking about making an altering toward a higher spirit or law. But even then, having an understanding that voodoo is based primarily in a mixture of all of these different spiritualities that come from West Africa in particular. Like there's some Igbo traditions in there. If you think about the energy of the circle, there's Togo Benin, there's Nigeria, particularly with the Ifa, Yoruba. So all of these things are consecrated and secretized in African American tradition in a relationship with the earth. And so that's really what I'm interested in, is just, how do I make it so that people are not afraid of this thing that there's no need to be afraid of.
You made it so normal and so everyday. And for some people, it really is. So you gave life to something that can be demonized.
Yes.
Now I want to pull back to the opening. Brilliant. So brilliant. Because the different generations that are going to be approaching the book itself, from the cover to the writing, but the opening itself, this intersection and knowing what was before, so on the edge of death, and then death spilling out centuries later. So maybe you can talk about what motivated this particular opening, which is, as we get even further, we see that, wow, you really didn't recognize what, when you open the pages, what's happening. Can you speak from that, please?
Can I read those?
Sure, yeah, right. Yes, please.
Sure.
Oh.
Ish. So chapter 1, Blood and Light. Nearly 2 centuries before the boy who was shot dead at the intersection of First and Bank stood up in his own blood and spoke his name as if it were just given to him. There was a town named Ours, founded by a mysterious and fearsome woman right where the boy had been shot. But perhaps this story begins centuries before then, as the muddy waters of the Apalachicola River, or further back on a ship named the Divider, carrying those misunderstood to be the future of slavery to the Western world. To begin in any of those three places would lead back here to this boy, age 17, fresh out of his junior year in high school, a bottle of orange Fanta rolling and emptying onto the street just feet away from his body, from which blood spilled until it stopped, until the boy with his closed eyes opened them with a new mind and breath and understanding that shook him. He had been lying in the middle of the street for 3 hours, with police tape squaring him off from his neighbors, friends, and family. The whole hood had rocked at the sound of the bullets popping off. Then he dropped, and they all gathered, hymnless and weathered, to see yet another one of their youngest take his last breath. But he stood, his wounds no more than memories, as he touched himself where he had been shot, a resonance of pain still there until it too departed. The smell of burnt cornbread in the air that someone had abandoned so that he wouldn't have to lie there for hours alone. Yes, they had all left something behind to stand in that street together, blocked off from touching him and told to back up, had it yelled at them as though they were to have as little care and consideration for the boy as the ones who had shot him. He dusted himself off and looked around at the faces looking back at him. What the fuck? My God. Peeling from a mouth astounded into a beautiful circle. The whole block went quiet except for that question, and the loud suddenly sparked up in the crowd despite the cops right there. But who could give a fuck now when the dead have risen? And he heard his name screamed from someone in the crowd, the voice bright and familiar. But a part of him didn't recall exactly who had said it. He had two minds now, one in the future and one from the past. I'll stop there, it goes a little bit longer.
Wow. And then when you get to the clincher and the connection of that, it speaks to these multiverses and also the movement of spirit in between time and all of that. But also I really want to go to, what is freedom? How do you see it? Or, I know it's big, you went there with this big book.
That's why I told you.
I know, right? Because there are these ideas of freedom, and then there is the reality of freedom. So I'm leaving it broad so that you can be able to have the freedom to speak from it.
So one thing that I learned from, I did an event with Percival Everett, and we asked the same question. So I said, no, because I don't even remember what I said. But he said the idea of freedom is pretty much buttressed around what the rights are, what are rights. And so you can have as much freedom or the concept of freedom as you want. But if the system in which you live denies you rights that further delineate what that freedom is or describe what that freedom can be, then it just is an abstraction. So that's one idea of it, which is the political aspect. To be free means that you also have allowed to you rights that everyone shares that keep a kind of order. My idea of freedom leans more towards Nina Simone, which is no fear. And even there, like that's a lofty kind of like fear is embedded in us to keep us alive.
Yeah.
But to not have fear that what we're supposed to be able to rely on will betray us, right? Or this understanding that someone who is embodied as I am, meaning human, being a person, would figure out strange ways to set themselves apart from me and use those differences, whether it be a caste system, whether it be race, whether it be gender, to then deny rights, right?
Wow.
So it's all intersected in the way where it is a fear of an other from whatever source that dictates what other people's, feelings are about another person, but all of it becomes systematized by whoever is in power so they can benefit from it, usually for financial reasons. And so my hope is that when folks read this book, they know that fear is something that has to be moved through, not ignored, not rejected, not denied, if they get to the other side of it. Otherwise, even the freedom that you get with magic, with something that is beyond, logic, still won't succeed.
Yes, because, well, as we learn, magic can go wrong too, and then there is a darker side to it. Now, I wanted to speak from freedom as we but as we move. through the names.
Yeah.
The power in the giving of oneself your new name and how you were inspired. I loved all the names and they're so generational. They move across time and space. And so as I asked that, I also would like to, and dare I even go there to say, who came to you first? Which character? Some will assume one or many others, but I'm just curious, as we're thinking about names.
Joy.
Oh, my favorite. I told you, oh yeah.
There's a character in the book named Joy, and describing her, everything about her is a spoiler. That's the thing about Joy. What I can say is that she is on the younger end of the character spectrum in all of the characters, and she's born in this kind of suburb, this town right outside of New Orleans that really should be part of New Orleans, but there's shame around it, so it hasn't been incorporated. And she has a French father and a mixed mother, black, white, and so everyone considers her to be this quadroon because she's a quarter black, but she rejects that.
Yeah.
Also, there's rage that her father has because she's so much darker than even her mother, and so he's assuming that she had extramarital relations with a black man. But her journey through the book is absolutely violent and beautiful and challenging. And she came first as someone who, in the short story, was a mother of two, which, you know, is very different from how she's presented here, and healing from something that had happened to her husband that the town did to the husband. And then she just kept evolving and getting younger and more active, as the young folks say.
Wow. The irony though of joy and how we would think about joy, although then coupling that with violence.
Yes.
And then what we do with violence as us acting out and why.
Right.
So again, I encourage everyone to just get prepared for these beautiful names from, what do we have? Mr. Wife, yeah. We have Miss Love, Naima, Salah, Francis, of course, Saint, Abba, Justice. See, I'm on a roll. Luther, Phillip, Foster, Rain, Aurora. Can we talk about Aurora? Aurora is that thorn. Okay.
Someone, I had been asked who most embodies freedom in the novel, and I said that it was Abba, because of the way that he makes decisions and he sticks by them, and even in those decisions. Oh, I can also say this: there's this idea of freedom for self and freedom for the community, and I was trying to figure out a way of describing how being in the middle is the safest way, because if you're freedom for self at all times, then it's ego, and we know what ego does. But if it's freedom for the community always, then there's self-sacrifice. And so there's a way of being balanced and making decisions that positively affect in both directions. You feed yourself, and so you can better feed the community. The community is fed, they can better feed you. And I feel like Abba is in a good space in the middle. But she asked, she's like, well, what about Aurora? I said, well, Aurora was always there. Aurora didn't have to evolve to get there. There's just something about her where she's in that center space. She came much later. In the creating version of the novel.
Wow. Well, I point out that she was a thorn because, again, I love how people assume everybody gets along. Oh no, that's the complications of freedom. We assume that everybody gets along and everybody doesn't, and then how that plays out, and then who belongs. So can we go to ours? How did that come into light, become activated?
The concept of town itself.
Ours, and also, you know, just what it feels like for you as you are given that to the future.
So there are a lot of books that deal with Black towns, but they always, or typically end in tragedy because of interference from the outside world. And so when we talk about systems and practices, so if there's white racism coming in, then the town can no longer exist. And they can't evolve and figure out how to, manage their own ills. They can't even have their own ills. And so what I needed to do was figure out a way to isolate ours so that there couldn't be any interception from racism, a competing Black town, or anything like that. They just needs to be as isolated as possible so that they can have their stories fully fleshed out.
Yeah,
And so the idea that they had to be invisible to everyone else
yeah,
came to play, which is where the magic is absolutely heightened.
yes.
So then I had to figure out, well, how can they be imperceptible? Not being imperceptible, they can't be interacted with at all.
No, and then when they do though, so maybe we could talk about the desperation for these moments, when we do see whiteness emerge, get through the portals.
It don't last long.
It doesn't, not at all.
It don't last
No.
long. In the first iteration of it, with the reporter,
Yes, oh,
whose name I can never remember.
well,
And
but
I can never remember his name, but he didn't die. But he didn't do too well.
not at all, no, not at all. But then as we think about the coming of the white militia, but then the response in that.
Oh, the response is beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat like, whoa, I'm right here. Oh my God, it's good. Wow, this is really it really felt like a movie. It really, that's why I told you it needs to be a series. It is beautiful, it's a masterpiece. Hello? I saw it from the beginning and all the way through. I would like to, I'm sorry, yes.
There's also a way where both the reporter and this other group, they force themselves into the town. And they've been warned and they were saying, just don't come, we're good, we're not gonna do anything to y'all. But there was a way where the entitlement to knowing the space and being a part of the space and taking over the space. And that's when the violence, so it's not just, they came in and they were gonna kill them. No, it's, you were warned. Like, we need this for ourselves, and you didn't respect that, and I don't know what's gonna happen to you, but, cause a lot of it, the first part is out of everybody's hands.
Yeah.
The second part, I said.
Well, that's what's so nuanced, that never have I really seen this perspective that does center Blackness in a Black world, but also we lose sense of time. And then time itself being something, a whole other power of knowing that we get to. How did you tap into the whole idea of portals and multiverses? But again, moving in between spaces, that's probably a word I love all the time, multiverses. But nonetheless, we have the invisibility stones, we're having these, maybe we can speak to the stones.
Yeah.
As you're speaking to the earth and the senses,
Right.
the sensory world, and you did a fantastic job on that. Made me always feel like I was there and touching the earth or whatever was going on. But yeah, if you can speak to that, the symbols, the symbolism, and the portals of
For me, the
interest.
circle was the biggest one.
Okay.
I was thinking of the Congo Yola, which, how do I describe this in 10 seconds? Draw a circle, and so I have to face this way. So on this side, going counterclockwise, we think about the pattern of the sun, the light of the sun. So if it's there, then we consider that, I'll do this for you, birth, middle age, old age, and then beneath this is death. And so that being a symbol that is throughout the entire book. And that's an understanding in the Yola how one can reincarnate, but it's like more of a spiritual path. So you can do it literally as in this is where life begins, this is the middle, this is the end. Or you can do it figuratively. This is part of a life, and then you go through that death process and you come back having learned the lessons, gained your wisdom. So that's where, for me, time most heavily plays in the book, that most of ours is made in a kind of circle square situation. The way that the clocks betray everyone, the fact that you put an H in front of this in the book, we call hours, with as though like
That's
second hours.
time.
Brilliant. And getting lost in that is a way of, also symbolically saying that someone isn't gaining the wisdom they're supposed to, so they keep going in the wrong direction and keep getting lost somewhere in their pattern of circular times.
Yes, and speaking of loss, or thinking of memory, loss of memory, who am I as this path is evolving? So now, can we talk a little bit about Saint?
Okay.
How do you think that people will receive same?
They either will or won't.
Tell it.
They either will or won't. Now you're gonna like her or hate her, but you're gonna want to keep reading her. I hope.
Oh, yeah.
She's rough. She's rough.
Mm,
She's the kind of person who understands her way of doing things, and every other way of doing it is questionable,
mm,
requires suspicion,
mhm,
maybe even a violent response.
mhm. Ooh.
But it's so much of it is accidental.
Mhm.
So much of it is, I have a purpose, I know what I wanna do. Here's the act, and then the act spirals out of her control. And she's like, I didn't really, my bad. Well,
Yeah.
like, it goes that way, something
Yeah.
devastating happens, she's like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so for her, having so much power, but having very early on in the novel, such a small understanding of how to use it, and not really being able to, and not wanting to engage with the others in
Yeah.
town,
Right.
because she understands that there's something going awry with her abilities.
Mm-hmm.
That for me built a bridge of sympathy to better understand what it was that she was going through and why her responses were always so heightened to
Mm-hmm.
everything that was around her.
Right.
She's one of my favorite characters,
Yeah.
but she's not likable, and that's why she's one of my favorite characters.
Mm.
There's a lot to dislike about her. But
She's
very
so
honorable.
real and everyday though. I realize how you can just cut someone off
Yeah.
and it be what it is and
Yeah.
where they're at in that moment, or you're never walking in my house. And
Yeah.
just that everyone became accustomed to that.
Yes.
But then how Francis really becomes a whole other activating part of Saint and really as we're seeing the whole storyline, but can we speak about Francis? Because you have again changed the angles in ways that to kill or attempt to kill, and then what happens if that happens to you? Wait, what? Now that's a whole other creation of power. So can we speak to Francis? Because I really appreciated them completely.
Francis, I needed to create Francis because there was nothing that could really stop Saint in the story. And so Francis comes in as a way to really push her to grow in some way, or at least challenge herself or feel challenged in the story. I won't tell you what Francis can do, but
Yeah.
as soon as Francis is introduced, you know there's something very powerful about them.
Mm-hmm.
And because of certain reasons that will go unknown, or untold, she usually goes by she when people recognize her however they see her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either he or she, and she doesn't correct anyone because she's like, it doesn't matter, because I'm born from water.
Yes.
Her idea is I'm born from water, she doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But throughout the majority of the novel, she is what Francis is referred to. But there's a funny part where the town is interacting with her, and folks are like, that man with the long legs sure is funny. It's like, well, the lady with the long legs is funny too.
Right.
And you can see the people that everyone's talking about. They're talking about the same person.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out what would it take for someone to not care, particularly in that moment where ungendering is another type of violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for someone to be seen as having two genders and then not care because they see themselves as not even gendered, but as an element of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
That was really important for me.
Yeah, very much. Again, you all are gonna appreciate Francis, very much so. Can we talk about the weapons? All of a sudden, I just was thinking about Eloise and thinking about the incident.
Yes.
And then also thinking about fire, okay, as I think about weapons.
Yeah.
And then I think, we can go with that. But again, we don't assume that people in freedom, that can happen. And then within a community.
And silence as a weapon as
Yes.
well. In reading it, I had to reread it so many times. And I found so many moments of silence. Even though the language is very floral, it was my intention to make something that was very poetic is what we call it, but lyrical, I would say beautiful. There's still moments where characters are very much alone and just sitting with their thoughts, or just sitting with themselves, trying to figure out what they feel.
Yes.
And this is a privilege that they didn't really have earlier on, or if they're part of the new generation, they have, and you don't take it for granted. There's an understanding that we can be alone in this moment without interruption and learn from each other. And so there's that as a kind of weapon or a way to protect a shield. Eloise and in turn, Amelie, or Amelia, excuse me, they are in the belief that if you can dish it out, then you should be able to take it.
Yeah.
If you can dish it out, you should be able to take it. And then they bring joy into it, they're like, okay, you dish it out a little bit, too much.
Right, exactly. We dished it, but you really dished it. And then for it to be in New Orleans.
In New Orleans,
That was even more potent.
Right.
Okay, as I began to think about how is this happening? What are the costs to inflict pain or violence on someone? What then are the consequences have we ever considered? And then the masses, and then what all has evolved. Okay. A plague of arrogance. That chapter, of course, diseases and all the things, the medical world, but also thinking about, well, there's a racial aspect to it that was so powerful. Again, you're open up saying these white corpses, and then the again, if you can speak to that,
It was a mistake on Saint's part, right? Ooh. And so all she wanted, and this is why invisibility was the go-to, because her intention is not to kill broadly. She's just trying to figure out how can I keep this area as safe and protected as possible. And so the first trial of that was to be a kind of rejection spell. Like people who get close to this particular perimeter will feel an unease or a sickness, and then they can get out of it, they'll just go away. And the trigger of it would be someone who believed that slavery was fine. Slavery is good, Black people getting what they deserve, et cetera. But what ended up happening is instead of sickness, it became just death. Like a sickness that automatically leads to death. That's just one of her oops. Like, oh, I'm sorry.
The stones were the wrong way.
The stones were the wrong way. And so it speaks to her imperfection as a practitioner of whatever it is that she's doing. She doesn't even really know what it is. But then also just how important it was to her to make sure no one infiltrates this stuff. Because there were Black people dying too. Because it was more about a belief system as opposed to just race. And so when the Black folks who believed that slavery was a good concept started dying and someone tells Saint, she's like, I see. And that's it. So, because for her, it doesn't matter what they look like, it matters what they believe.
And then if I remember correctly, the dead aren't allowed in ours. So then, just the thought of it. I mean, because it made me realize how we're surrounded by cemeteries. And then yet to imagine you don't live next to dead. So but yet that coexistence that again of the living and the what is dead and what is undead.
Because there's cemeteries on outskirts. But there is a house that is walking distance from it. And the aftermath of that. So everyone else is relatively far from their cemetery except for this one house.
And I guess sort of, if there's one other character that can allow for what I feel some people respond to is Madam Jenkins, and with this, and really being the one that is the whole other mother, the nurturer for women and the women's circle. Maybe you can speak to that, because that really made me I felt it. And I was so grateful that you were able to tap into to see value, to place that in, and to really bring that alive.
So the women's social circles, historically from what I've read, my memory is not good, which is why I try not to talk about history, but from what I've read, those social circles came later, like after abolition. But I wanted to make it foundational to those who were recently and still within the antebellum period, so that it didn't seem to come out of nowhere. I'm pretty sure those women wanted to do something like that, or had it, just wasn't, any record of it. And so I implemented that so that those women would have a space to, talk about what does it mean to be safe to each other and safe for each other. And also to, because a lot of the violence done in the book is by the hands of women, to when it gets out of hand, how do we hold each other accountable
Yeah.
when we, hurt others in our community?
Yes, I know we may be transitioning to the audience for audience questions, so we wanna go ahead and open up. I know some people, they have some burning questions. So,
And I'll keep an eye on the.
okay, I don't know if you'll need the microphone. Get the hand over there.
I don't know if I had a question, but I really just wanted to shout out that opening part you read because, as someone who moved to this area in full time in 2009 and, kind of lived through the Ferguson uprising and the outrage of Michael Brown's body being left uninterred, uncared for, unreported for hours. To have this alternative history of him getting up, baby, that took me through it. You know what I'm saying? That's a hallelujah moment. And I hope that in some multiverse, that is what happened,
Oh, yeah,
that he got up.
yeah,
I really thank you so much for that.
thank you, yeah.
Hi, Phillip, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so thrilled to read this book. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about place and why you decided to locate ours, here, and how that changed, especially as you have moved through all over the country over the course of writing this book, how that influxed the experience and, just place, go for it.
Born and raised in Chicago, I have lived in the Atlanta area, I've lived in St. Louis, I've lived in New York, I currently live in Philadelphia. I currently live in Philadelphia, I've lived in Colorado, Lafayette, which is between Boulder and Denver. Yeah, I've lived some places, Vermont, in Vermont for 2 years. Ooh, that was interesting. I chose the St. Louis area, not St. Louis proper, that's a story. And I also didn't make it so that it was either Ferguson or Kinloch, because again, I made it a fictional town just north in a way that is a mythology of maybe a combination of Ferguson and Kinloch. But predominantly geographically would be where Kinloch is located because that's where the airport infiltrates and destroyed really that town. I wanted to write in the antebellum period where the South was in the antagonist. It's always, this pulse out. It was happening up here too, and I didn't know that Missouri was a slave state. It wasn't, added to, America. Part of the Missouri Compromise was, Maine could be a free state and Missouri would be a slave state. But with that being the case, I always wondered why the trains partition the city the way they do. Like, oh, that's a carryover from that period, that the segregation of, it being wherever the blacks are is a place where whites are not supposed to be, or vice versa. And so I remember it was maybe 2018, maybe even earlier than that. There was a statistic that said it was in the tens of thousands, maybe $80,000 the median income north of Del Mar, and south it was something like $300,000. And I just wanted to imagine what if we were to think about a fictional world, we don't need the fictional, it is the actual history. What would be the lead into for something like that to exist? And just starting just north of that and assuming that a lot of that would just bleed together. So that I didn't have to rely on lynching people or whipping people. There's nothing like that in the book. I didn't want it to be a tale of that kind of violence, that kind of trauma. But I still wanted to recognize and identify that there were some things happening in Missouri and Illinois and Indiana where the KKK was founded.
Yeah.
So we don't have to look to the north as this place where everything bad happened. There are people's histories up here that are very rich who are survivors, Black folks who are survivors and made culture in ways when all around them was absolute violence and tyranny. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
I don't need that. So I haven't read this yet, but I certainly read
Very early.
numerous versions of early iterations of the novel. And what's been fascinating listening to your conversation is, even though obviously this is a whole lot more of a book than what we saw early on, it feels to me like the book I would have imagined you would have ended up writing. Kind of astonishingly, actually, because in some ways it wasn't so clear.
Right.
And I'm wondering whether the way this book ended up has surprised you in any way?
Yes. The earlier versions of this novel will be in a box in somebody's library, so they can go into the archives and look at it. Those pages.
Those papers.
They would not be good. Not because they're bad, but nothing that we worked on together is in the book. Maybe the names.
Names.
Last, yeah.
Wow.
But as far as what this became, because I also had an outline, and I completely didn't use the outline, so I was writing freestyle for the entire novel, trying to keep everything together, and so I would jot down a note, like, oh, go back to that, you can't forget that.
Yeah.
But the outline was so restrictive, I couldn't imagine it, and so I tossed it out,
Wow.
and this came out. The scope of it, because originally I thought it would be, I thought it would be between 80 and 100,000 words. This is 185,000 words, edited from 210,000 words. And so by the time 2018 came around, I only had 4 chapters. I had it in my mind, oh, this is gonna be an epic. It has to be a long book. For one, because the people in the book deserve to have their stories told. But then also the concept of the main character, it didn't really support what was happening in here. So everyone needed to have a plot line. There are about 18 plot lines in the book. They all get resolved and they're all intersecting. So no, I had no idea that this was coming at all. Like so.
But we thought it was gonna be long.
Yes,
I remember that.
but
Wow.
I didn't think it would be this long.
How did the pandemic impact the writing at all? Like, you know.
Oh, well, the pandemic affected me
Mhm.
in a way where in being isolated, I realized that the teaching that I was doing in the office hours and all those things were keeping me from understanding that I am neurodivergent. And I mean, kind of compoundedly,
Yeah.
to the point where I was sitting there like, oh, I might need someone to talk to, some medication, some prayers, some
Oh,
a
okay.
degree, oil anointment, something, you know. And so I was able to sit with myself and learn who I was during the epidemic, because I was forced in that kind of isolation. And I think that's why a lot of folks were resistant to being alone, because there are a lot of demons to work out when you have to confront them.
Yeah, and all you have is yourself and your thoughts.
Right.
Wow.
And so I did work on the novel,
Yeah.
but I also work on myself.
Wow. Well, good for all of it.
Related to the question right before, talk a little bit about the imagery program and your writing and how, I don't wanna say how it helped, but how it shaped and changed. Changed you as a writer. Because I'm listening to this woman talk about how this is not what you worked on. You went to class. This is not it. So.
That was the start.
It was a style, yeah.
Okay, but it's hard to, let's say somebody who's thinking about it,
Mhm.
I'm not going to start something. I want something to be kind of on its way to finish by the time I finish my time here. So,
Oh, I get to.
I can see the plus in it,
Mhm.
because without it, maybe we wouldn't have had even, start. And I would also be interested in how it moved from a set of short stories
Yes.
to this instead of maybe a collection of short stories. Yeah, just something I think.
I could do that. I was in my MFA as a poet. And so my book of poetry was finished. I did what I was supposed to do with it. Now I understood where you were going with the question, like, okay, so I was not in the fiction genre, I was in the poetry genre, working with Mary Jo Banks and Carl Phillips. And Catherine Davis had this really generous class that was about working on the novel at your pace, and we just support you in doing it. Wow. And so I was writing the novel and writing a book of poetry at the same time. And I would not have gotten to this book if I didn't take this class. I took it twice, and I think I came back with maybe 10 extra pages the second time. It didn't grow much more. I couldn't work on it. I wasn't mature enough, and I didn't know that. I needed a lot more time, and I needed a lot more reading, life experience. But if I didn't, even, this is how it helped. It told me that other people thought I could write fiction, they thought it was good, and it told me that there would be folks excited to read it. And so I just felt encouraged to keep going, you know, 6 years later when I actually started again. But yeah, I needed that community to say, please finish this, please, whenever you do, please finish it. And as far as, what was the second part of the?
They put me in good spot. Oh, I'm not talking about the short story.
Oh.
Yeah, instead of a collection.
The collection.
Terrible short story. That, to me, that is of the creative writings, that is the hardest for me. It's like writing a very long poem. Because there's something about not ending it with a bow, but also not ending it vaguely, that balance. And having it be a good length and not the micro things I can't, I'm gonna sound like a hater, I can't read the short pieces.
Oh.
And then if it goes too long, it's no longer a short story, it's a novella. And so that when someone is writing a short story and it is a solid piece of work and it feels like you read a novel, but it also feels like you read a poem, I don't know how they do it. I can't do that. And so I just kept getting longer and longer. Even when I had won the short story prize, when I was at fourth place.
Fourth place?
And I don't think
Yes.
fourth place existed, I think it made it so.
Wow. They started.
There was no way. Crystal Wilson was the judge of that prize, and in her notes, she said, oh, this feels like it's supposed to be longer.
Wow.
So even she saw through the facade, and I put up like, oh, this is a short story, it was not a short story. So I that's not a skill that I have.
Have you met many other poets that have engaged in such an ambitious way with a novel?
Now.
Oh, now? Oh, okay. Why now? Why not before?
I think there was actually a stigma against it.
Oh.
And folks like, oh, the boys writing the novels.
You like this book is so much better because you're a poet.
And I don't feel this, but I've been told that fiction writers feel like poets write better novels than they do.
Ooh.
And so a lot of the disdain wasn't coming from other poets, it was coming from other fiction writers.
So I guess it's like historians and journalists, you know, like, hey, you taking a job.
Yeah, and so I think poets were, you know, acquiescing to this is what I'll just do this. But I always had a story in them. I consider myself a writer, but poet is a shorter word than writer. Like if I had to fit it inside of a name or username.
Yeah.
But PBW writer is what I would go by, PBW being my initials, because I don't see myself as being a poet. I see myself as writing whatever I want. And I started writing fiction first. I wasn't a poet first.
Wow. So it's all coexistent.
It all
of them.
existed. And so the question that I get, which is how does poetry influence your fiction writing? I'm like, it doesn't. They always were in tandem. If anything, you know, I was writing them at the same time. And so that conversation, I'm still trying to figure out what that is.
As one who's been told I write and make people feel, you do that very well. How would we inspire others too? How do we engage the feeling through
writing?
Through writing, yes.
Sense work. Sense work.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to say someone came in here, let's call him Joe. Joe came in, sat at the table, sat at the seat, crossed their legs and stared or whatever. you get the gist of like what's happening. But if Joe came in with his head down and he sat in the chair and the chair barely creaked. And then he crossed his legs and the knee popped and then he lowered his head and then maybe smells like rain or something like that. But in order to engage with the senses was more that you could create an atmosphere for one. So then maybe even understanding of how this person and the way the setting and the world interact with them is symbolic of how they feel on the inside.
Yes.
If their knees are popping, maybe there's some kind of, they're not in motion a lot, they're stagnant, maybe their age, or maybe like me, knows what's going on. They used to be an athlete or something, they have an injury. If they smell like rain, they probably walked here as opposed to taking a cab, they came from a long distance. If the chair doesn't squeak when they sit down, maybe there's something empty in them or something ghostly about them. And so you have to really interact with every part of your senses so that they can build with you that kind of emotional understanding. They call it the correlative, what is it called? Objective correlative. And I don't like the name objective correlative because it's really subjective. It's the idea that you can create a kind of understanding by using common tropes of imagery. So, if it's stormy outside, that means sadness. Or if there's a teddy bear missing an eye, loss of innocence, something like that. But that doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. But yeah, it's called the
And let's go ahead and thank both of our guests one more time for joining us.
I did.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We have ours as well as some local poetry for sale at the desk if you haven't gotten these yet. We're gonna move to signing, so grab your books and then we're gonna make a little line kind of coming through this, right?
And make sure you also Sowande Mustakeem's book.
Oh, thank you.